Okay, we are chapter 25, start with verse 29. Now, we're not using the big blue Art Scroll books now. Now we're using the Art Scroll translated Rashi. And I realized we had a lot of copies of it, so we can use that to. So this is on page 279. Mm-hmm. And yesterday we read the story that there is something called a birthright, and the birthright is usually assigned to the oldest child, oldest son, and therefore, since Esau was born first, he's the one who should get it. And he comes in from the field exhausted, and he doesn't want to bother fixing supper. And Jacob is aware that Esau despises the birthright in general, though we don't know why. We'll see that in Rashi now. We proved that from the later verse in which Esau says to his father, Isaac, that Jacob cheated him twice, cheating him out of the birthright and the blessing. But then a few verses later, it says that Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing and leaves the birthright out altogether. So in describing the hatred in his heart, the birthright isn't even mentioned, which means the birthright was of no account to him whatsoever. And we proved that Esau's not dying because, first of all, it says he was exhausted. And second of all, it says he ate, drank, got up, and went, which is not what a dying person does. He needs to convalesce. And it says that Esau despised or belittled the birthright. And it is obvious as a piece of logic that if you give up X to stay alive, that does not count as despising or belittling it. Indeed, it's a question of life or death. You'd give up anything you have. Only if he traded the birthright as in place of the trouble of fixing supper could you say that he despised the birthright or belittled the birthright. And furthermore, we pointed out that when the text says, I'm going to die, of what use is to me the birthright of going to die, going to die in Hebrew is not the same as dying or about to die. I proved to you that dying or about to die in Hebrew is mace, because Jacob, just before the sequence where he blesses his children and dies, says to Joseph, Hine anochi mace, behold, I am mace. And since he lives on for another hour, he's obviously not dead. Thank you very much. He's obviously not dead. He's dying. And Esau avoids that word. He doesn't say mace. He says holech lamus. So he's specifically saying that he's not dying. So somebody portrays this as Jacob cheating Esau out of the birthright by using the leverage of saving his life. It's just nonsense. The words do not support that. Yeah.
No, still the last piece, the idea that he belittled the birthright. I don't see how that necessarily shows. You could still say it's like, if for instance, if someone goes up to you and they're like, give me $1, or they're robbing you, give me $1, I'm gonna kill you. Let's say, you would say like, the $, still seems minuscule. Even though if I give it to them, I'm saving my own life here. Even though the thing that he's giving up is saving his life, could it still not be necessarily valuable?
Okay, I'll repeat it for the recording. This way, you see, a good long course in logic would help, because you've twisted the significance to the point. The subject under discussion is, can you prove X? And you're pointing out that X is still possible. Yeah, sure, it's possible. Lots of things are possible. That doesn't mean they're true, and it doesn't mean you can prove them. We're discussing whether you can prove, not that it isn't so. So you're saying the fact that someone gives up X to stay alive doesn't mean that X is very valuable. Could be that, the thing that is needed to keep him alive is a single dollar. That's true. But on the other hand, the fact that he is described as despising and belittling it means that he's treating it as if it had very little value. He's treating it as if it had very little. Not that it's possible that it had little value, but he's treating it as if it had little value. Now, where do we see that he's treating it as if it had little value? If you say he gave it up to stay alive, then he's not treating it as if it might have a little value, but he's not treating it that way. Giving it up to stay alive is no indication that you think it's of little value. It might be of little value, but it might not. Right? The point here is that if the text concludes with the words, he belittled the birthright, he despised the birthright, that's not consistent with saying that he gave it up to stay alive, because if he gave it to stay alive, he's not despising it. He's not belittling it. He's not trivializing it. It might be trivial, but he's not trivializing it. He's giving it up to stay alive.
So you can't think of it as trivial if he's giving it to stay alive.
Again, you're working at a different point. The question is whether the actions that are described in the sequence are consistent with saying the actions. What he did is consistent with saying that he belittled it. He trivialized it. But what do we see? What did he do? According to the false scenario, what he did was he gave it up to stay alive. Giving it up to stay alive cannot be portrayed as trivializing or despising something. It might be worth nothing. He might not think that it's worth anything. But his action of giving it up to stay alive isn't an action of trivializing it. It is an action of despising it. Right? That's all that's being pointed out. That in the story, you can't end, we have a story here, and the text ends the story with the words, and he trivialized and despised the birthright. That does not describe the events in the story. He might have been wearing a green hat also, but we're talking about words that are supposed to sum up what the story tells us, and it doesn't tell us that. Only if he traded the birthright for the ease of not having to make supper, then the story is telling me that he trivialized it, because the story tells me that he'd rather give up the birthright than fix supper. So we're not talking about what might be true outside the story or independent of the story. We're talking about the last sentence of the story that sums up the message of the story. And the message of the story, if the story was that he gave it up to stay alive, the message of the story would not be that he trivialized it or despised it. You're asking a separate question that's completely independent. Could it still be that it was worth nothing? Yeah, it could be. It could be. But nothing in the story indicates that. And putting the last sentence of the story to indicate something that's not written in the story is textually nonsense. You don't write it on text that way. Yeah.
Could it be concluded from this incident that he was looking for an excuse to give it away?
100%. 100%. Since we know that losing it for him was trivial, so we could, I would say, we can, because of what we're going to say now, we'll see in Rashi. When he says, look, I'm going to die, so of what use is to me is the birthright, he's saying that because I'm going to die, whatever that means, however we're supposed to understand I'm going to die, because of that, I really have no use for it. That's what the words say. And since he has no use for it, get rid of it to get some benefit, some profit, would definitely be like someone would say to me, you've done me such nice things for me, I have a present for you. I have a subscription to a daily newspaper, and it's really a really very complete newspaper, and okay, that can be interesting, fine. And it's written in Chinese. Really? Golly. Thanks, but I don't read Chinese. I'm not going to, take pictures of it and run through Google Translate to get my news. I'm just not going to do that. So it may be very valuable. It's not valuable to me because my background and my capabilities are such that I can't make any use of it. He's saying, since I'm going to die, whatever that means, still then I'm going to, it has no value to me. And then, if it's of no value to me, somebody say to me, oh, so that a subscription to the Chinese newspaper, if I give you $100, would you give it to me? Now let's say the subscription costs $500. Sure, I'll give it to you for $100. I don't have any use for it at all. So of course I'm looking to get rid of it. What do I need something that's of no use to me whatsoever? Worse than that, he thinks he's going to, well, we didn't say what going to die means. We'll come to that, yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask two questions. The first one is that perhaps we could learn from the first approach that Esav has to this food. Already there's like something like kind of improper, like this red thing, like just before, after that Yaakov will tell him about the exchange, but I mean from that scene we can also learn. We heard before that that was the same day that Abraham passed away.
Okay, this is not in the text. This is in the oral tradition.
But okay.
So, I'm not getting the point.
No, but from the first scene in the text.
First scene in the text.
When Esav comes to Yaakov and Yaakov is
Yes.
cooking.
Yes.
Even the expression of Esav before the exchange is proposed, it's already indicates a lot of things of the way Esav treats like even a simple request, like it's a.
Okay, so you're saying that which we're going to look at when we look at Rashi. Rashi has a very gruesome, bitter remark to make about it, what it means when he said he asked for the food. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's if you don't know the Rashi, then it's much worse than you think. But you're right. That we will study that in a minute. Okay, what's the other question?
No, because it was related with like why we learned that it's related with the lamut, the concept of lamut. Could it be related with, of course, with the support of the oral tradition, but that Abraham passed away that day, so that maybe is it related to lamut and the way he phrases it, since Abraham passed away and this food is involved with Abraham's.
No, I don't think so. I don't hear it. Holech lamut means I'm going to die. Everybody's going to die.
Right.
So, but for him, the fact that he's going to die is a reason why the birthright is of no use to him. That's a mystery to us. We don't understand why that should be. So we'll have to analyze it. We'll have to see. Rashi will give us at least part of the answer to that question. By the way, before I do the Rashi, I just want to point out a piece of logic. Let's suppose that we had no reasonable explanation of the words "I'm going to die." No way to explain why, since he's going to die, therefore the birthright is of no use to him. It would be a mystery. There's no connection that we can discover. That would be no reason to go back on our conclusion that he wasn't dying, because we have 4 proofs that he wasn't dying. The right attitude would be, okay, so we have a problem, and we don't know how to solve it. That would not be a sufficient reason to go back and say, well, we'll change our minds and say that maybe he was dying, because there's too much evidence on the other side. There are 4 straightforward proofs that he wasn't dying. So you just have to leave it as a mystery. Yeah.
So could one proof pretty much degrading the birthright be pretty much kind of like on what he was saying as far as like, give me that red stuff. He's not saying, oh, give me those lentils, or pretty much describing what he's like getting as like great. But he's just saying, give me that red stuff and I'll give you this birthright.
Oh, no, you can't. See, now here he was very careful when he asked this question. This happens before the birthright comes in.
Yeah.
Birthright's not on the table yet. And birthright is a response to his request for food. So that's not going to work. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Rashi. Let's see, where we're up to. Yeah. So this is verse 30. We're to page 279, close to the bottom in the Rashi translation. The verb in the Hebrew of asking for the food is haliteni. They translate here, pour into me, which is not a bad translation. This means, says Rashi, I will open my mouth and Pour a lot into it. That's what the verb indicates. And we know this because we learned in the Mishnah, if you want to feed a camel, now you probably have heard that camels can go 2 weeks without food and water, or 3 weeks in the desert without food and water. You may not have heard that there's a special process by which this happens. They have to really stock up on food and water. They have places in their body where they can store it. But they don't know they're going on a trip. So you force feed them. That's what you do. You force feed them. Now, there are certain words in Hebrew for force feeding. And it says, if you're going to do this on Shabbos, so then you can't do it with ultimate, brutal, maximal force, which would be oves. You do it with moderate force, which is lahalit. That's important. The word here indicates force feeding a camel. What a word for Esau to use for himself. Stuff it down me, brother. Stuff it down. Pack it down. Just like you do for a camel. I think that's breathtaking. He's using animal language for himself. If somebody said it about him, the thought police would have you off in jail for discrimination and causing microaggressions and all the rest of it. But he does it to himself. He says it to himself. That's definitely crude. It's crude and brutal, the way he's talking. Yeah.
So, I guess, kind of to play, devil's advocate, could this be proof of him dying for pretty much just describing, just force feed, and I don't have enough strength to...
You never had somebody come in for a barbecue and say, I'm starving? He doesn't mean put me in the hospital. Just like a person comes very tired, and he throws himself on the couch and says, oh, I'm dead. Doesn't mean get called the undertaker either. It's a way of talking. It's a way of exaggerating for effect. He wants consideration and sympathy, and he wants service, so he talks that way. Okay. So yeah, because the word that is used is ayef, and the ayef means tired. It can mean exhausted. That's not unfair to say that it means very tired, but it doesn't mean dying because there's another word in Hebrew for dying, and it's not used. Ayef means tired, or very tired. Okay, now I'm going to skip the next Rashi. So now on the next page, 280, verse 31, we passed this over. Jacob says to him, sell as this day your birthright to me. The words as this day are not obvious. It's not obvious what they mean. As this day. So Rashi says as follows. This is to be understood as Targum Onkelos renders it. As this day, like the day, which is clear. Just as clearly as the fact that it is now daylight, which everybody can see, observe, and it's uncontroversial. I want the sale to be absolute, clear, and uncontroversial. Clear, indisputable sale. Now, I don't know of any indication how it was done. If only the two of them are there, so that would not be, there's nothing they could do to make it a clear, indisputable sale. Whatever they do, Esau could later deny that it happened. So I imagine that they wrote a document and had witnesses sign it, authorize it, and so forth and so on. That's the kind of sale that he wants. Now, he says, your birthright. Meaning, Jacob is saying, I know that it belongs to you. You're the firstborn, so you should get it. And since it's yours, I want you to sell it. If it weren't yours, then you wouldn't be able to sell it. But it is yours, and I want you to sell it to me. Now, what is the birthright? So here, Rashi's trading on general knowledge, which we didn't explain. A man has a certain role in the community. This is a very general principle. He could be the king. He could be the high priest. I'm quoting the Rambam now. He could be the person, let's say, who is assigned to check the weights and measures in the marketplace to make sure that they're fair. Some kind of role of authority. when he dies, other things being equal, that position goes to his oldest son. Now, it could be that the oldest son isn't worthy of it for one reason or another, then they'll pick somebody else. But other things being equal, it goes to the oldest son. This is brought down to halacha. It's not just folk mores. So when you hear that yeshivas pass from the Rosh Yeshiva to his son or to his son-in-law, and you think of it as a kind of nepotism, or depending upon your social Jewish identification, when you hear the leadership of a Hasidic community goes to the son or son-in-law of the previous Rebbe, and you think of that as a kind of nepotism, cancel the thought. It's a genuine Jewish principle. And if you ask, what is the reason for the principle? I think a reason is right on the surface. Who is likely to be more experienced in the administration of this authority than someone who has lived with it for many years on the inside, observing the one who's doing it in an almost continuous basis? This oldest son knows more about this particular type of activity than anybody else. Now, it's true if the oldest son is 6 years old and you have to bring him up, and okay, there could be exceptions. But the vast majority of the time, the oldest son will be clearly more qualified to administer this position than anybody else. So this isn't as if it's arbitrary and if it's prejudice and wanting to keep things in the family, all kinds of things that you'll hear by certain types of commentators. It has a very simple and obvious rationale. Now, so what was Isaac's position? Well, Abraham created a community of fellow servants of the Creator. He had thousands of followers. Isaac inherited the leadership of that community. So at the very least, he's going to be slated to step into Isaac's shoes and administer this community. Well, that's not Esau talk. That's not an Esau project. He's a man of the field. He's a hunter. He's independent. Certainly not going to administer a community like that. That's background information. Rashi takes it to another step, with quoting Chazal. The one who administers this community also functions as a kind of high priest. He functions as the one who expresses the relationship of the entire community to God. And indeed, we saw in the case of the 4 kings and the 5 kings, where Avimelech Melchizedek came out to greet Abraham and to congratulate him, and he blesses Abraham, and then he blesses God, and Rashi says over there that the priesthood was taken from Melchizedek and given to Avram. So we know he played the role of a priest in that way. And living up to the responsibilities of a priest is a tricky business. If you do it wrong, you make a mistake, then you suffer penalties. Now look at what the Rashi says. This is the bottom of page 280. Your birthright. Since the sacrificial service is performed by the firstborn, before the sin of the the golden calf, the firstborn of each family functioned as a priest. And Esau, therefore, is going to be the one who's going to carry out the sacrifices of the family. Jacob said, "This evil one is not worthy, that he should bring up offerings to the Holy One, blessed be he." So first of all, it would be something which would be appropriate to try to arrange that should be deflected from him. Now we come to Esau saying, the next page, "Look, I'm going to die." How did that happen? And what does he mean he's going to die? So Rashi's explanation is as follows. The birthright of the firstborn is gradually wandering away, for the sacrificial service will not be performed by the firstborn for all time. The tribe of Levi will take it. Number one. First of all, this idea, if you think, Esau, that you're going to occupy this position and you're going to have it, since you're going to take it, you'll pass it down to your descendants, you'll be the one whose family will carry this position. Not true, because in the future, it's going to be taken away from the firstborn, it's going to be given to the Kohanim, and therefore it's not a permanent position. But more than that, Esau said, So the birthright means carrying out the sacrifices for the family. What are they? What kind of sacrifices are they? What is the procedure like? What are its ups and downs? Its merits and demerits, its privileges and its dangers. And Jacob said to him, well, there are several prohibitions and punishments if it's not done correctly, and there are even death penalties. What's it? So Esau said, and he gives examples of cases where there are death penalties. Esau says, I'm not up to this. I'm not interested in this. I'm not going to be able to do it with care and responsibility. And you're telling me that if I make a mistake, it carries a death penalty. Living out the birthright is going to cause me to die. And therefore, I don't want it. So what Rashi is doing here is he's giving us an explanation of the words, I'm going to die, and making them into words which explain Esau's attitude. His attitude that's why I don't want it. This needs to be explained. I wouldn't say that the way Rashi does is the only possible way to do it, but it needs to be explained, and he's explaining it this way. That I'm going to die is not the statement that we're all mortal. And then you have to explain, okay, we're all mortal. So why is your being mortal like everybody else a reason why you wouldn't want the birthright? That I explained with the first explanation. My style of life is incompatible with this responsibility. And Esau, according to this explanation, Esau is saying, and death is the end. Don't tell me I'll get a reward in the world to come. I'm not on that wavelength. I'm not dealing with that. I'm living until death. That's my horizon. The horizon for my life, my activities, my goals, my values, my efforts is whatever I do until I die. And after that, who knows? And I'm not dealing with it. So for his lifetime in this world, the birthright is an albatross around his neck. It's something which is just going to drag him down. It's not going to give him anything that he's worth living for. That's the other explanation. Rashi's not going that way. Rashi doesn't want this to be just the fact that he's going to die like everybody else. He wants to see in the birthright itself a cause of death. And then the explanation of why he doesn't want the birthright is very clear. Because it will cause me to die. That's why I don't want to have it. Either way, the question is being answered. What does I'm going to die have to do with I don't want the birthright? And so we have two approaches. And as I said before, if you had no approaches, you still wouldn't go back to saying he was dying because the proofs that he's not dying are much too strong. Okay? We're together? Yeah.
What is the reason why the birthright went away from the firstborn and went to Sheva Levi was because he did the Egos of?
I'm not getting to it. The firstborn that what?
The reason why the birthright left the firstborn is because they did the Egos of. So
Yes.
if let's say Esau would have it, would it go away to Sheva Levi?
I'm not getting what you're saying.
The reason why the birthright left the firstborns.
Because they all participated in the creating the golden calf, right?
So if Esau would still have it and not sell it to Yaakov, would it go to Sheva Levi, as Rashi was saying?
Yeah, that wouldn't have any effect. The fact that it's coming through Esau rather than through Jacob is not going to affect whether they make the golden calf or not. The only point is that if you think of investing in it because this is the position of priesthood, it's only temporary. It's not historical.
The reason it became temporary because they did the Egos up.
Right. So that's the reason that's being given. That's why it's only temporary. So you're talking about the value that it has, that devalues it. It doesn't make it zero, but it's less value than something that would have been permanent. I'm not using that reason. Rashi mentions it. I'm not using it in my explanation, but that's a step. And then, much more than that, he personally is going to die. I think that's for him that's a much more powerful reason. But Rashi brings both. Okay, now. Okay, so now 34 at the bottom of the page. Esau belittled. The verse testifies to his wickedness, that he belittled the service of the omnipresent. So Rashi here is sort of calling in his debts here. So, what do you see in his treatment that's a kind of disgrace? What's the disgrace? In other words, to condemn a person that he treats something as belittling it is only a critique if the thing has great value. If it doesn't have great value, so he treated it as having no importance because it has no importance. So what's wrong with that? It's only a crime if it's something of great importance. So if you tell me that it's authority and it's position and it's respect that people give you because you're taking over your father's position, so on and so on, okay. So then it could be useful to you, and if you just, as we say in modern English, kicked it away, you could call that dumb or short-sighted or ignoble. But the word vayives is much more powerful than that. It's like, you're in the Louvre and there are broken windows and the wind is blowing and the papers are flying everywhere. Somebody says, get that picture and put it down on the paper so they won't fly. And it's the Mona Lisa, thank you. You're going to use the Mona Lisa as a paperweight. You don't use the Mona Lisa as a paperweight. You just don't do that. It's one of the greatest works of art ever produced by the human species in the history of mankind. You don't take it off the wall, use it as a paperweight. Let the papers fly. You don't do that. Right? Whereas if it were, the directions and the hallways to get to the exits, you could do it. Because it's not so terrible, because the thing isn't such a terribly valuable thing. So Rashi's got the value here by telling me that his resistance to the birthright is because it's going to cause him to die, because it is the service of God of the family, and that's what he throws away rather than fix supper. So then he's treating the opportunity to serve God as a representative of the family as something as of no value. That's a critique. That's a real critique. And that shows a certain corruptness. So that's what Rashi he achieves with his commentary. Okay, now the text goes on, chapter 26. There was a famine in the land. Aside from the first famine, there was the days of Avraham. We'll have to ask why that's important. We'll come back to that in Yisrael Hashem. And Isaac went to Avimelech, king of the Philistines, to Gerar. To do that, he went south. He's going south. Why is Isaac going south? What's the idea of going south because of a famine? Well, of course, you know the answer. When Abraham faced a famine in the land of Israel, he went to Egypt, and Egypt is south. So Isaac is doing just what his father did. And that's why, in the next verse, Hashem appeared to him and said, do not descend to Egypt. I know what you have in mind. I know what you're thinking to do. I'm telling you no. Dwell in the land that I shall tell you. So Rashi says, verse 2 at the bottom of page 281, do not descend to Egypt, for he had in mind to descend to Egypt as his father had descended in the days of the famine. So God said to him, don't descend to Egypt. Now the question, of course, will be, why not? Abraham did it. Other than the Ramban, I don't think anyone criticizes Abraham for what he did. Ramban does criticize him. He doesn't do it on the basis of any earlier source. That's his way of reading the events that took place. Rashi certainly is not going to assume that Abraham made a mistake. So it's very natural that Isaac should say, this is what my father did, and so I'm going to do it also. So God says to him, don't do it. So at this point, in the reader's mind, the question is, why not? And you want to get an answer which will distinguish between Abraham and Isaac. You don't want the reason that's given to Isaac not to go down to be a reason that would have applied to Abraham also, Because then you'd have to confront the contradiction in God's policies. So that's the challenge for Rashi at this point. Yeah.
Did you mention the concept of Isaac not being able to leave Israel before, once he came back from the altar?
I did mention it. Rashi's going to mention something similar to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So he says, that Rashi goes on, he says, God said to him, to Isaac, do not descend to Egypt, for you are a blemish-free offering. You are a pure, perfect offering. And the Olah is a fire offering, which means it's all burnt up on the altar. And that is what Abraham was told to do with Isaac, offer him up as an Olah, as a fire offering. And Rashi is saying, quoting a Medrash, that God says to him, that's what you are. And territory outside the land of Israel is not worthy of you. So you see a commentary at the bottom of the page. When you offer a sacrifice in the temple, the blood and the body of the sacrifice cannot be taken outside the temple. If it's taken outside the temple, they become disqualified. Now, the commentary there says, in a certain way, in a certain sense, the whole of the land of Israel could be regarded as the whole of the temple. And that's why he's being told not to take him outside the land of Israel. So I can give you just a little bit of background to that idea. First of all, one of my chavrusos pointed out to me many years ago in the beginning of Masechta Kelim, it says there are 10 levels of holiness for the temple, and the first one is the city of Jerusalem, the whole city. So in a certain sense, the temple encompasses the whole of the city, which gives it certain special qualities, and then you go up in various stages to the highest, which is the Holy of Holies. And indeed, the whole of the city of Jerusalem, I'm talking about the old city, the original city, the whole city of Jerusalem is described in many verses as Lifnei Hashem, before Hashem, in Hashem's presence. So for example, Ma'aser Sheni, second tithe, which has a certain holiness to it, you have to take it up and eat it inside the city of Jerusalem because it says Lifnei Hashem, eat it before Hashem. Now, so that shows you that the temple, the presence of the temple can extend beyond walls of the actual temple itself, or the partitions of the courtyard, can extend to the city. But there is a midrash that says when the Mashiach comes, the temple will spread out to the whole of the land of Israel, and the land of Israel will spread out to the whole world. So there is something in the whole of the land of Israel which is a kind of associated presence of the temple. Only in our times, it's less powerful, and in the future it'll be more powerful. So the slide from temple to the land of Israel is not such a big slide, and there is an association. And what Rashi is quoting here says, because you are a blemish-free, a pure sacrifice, you shouldn't go beyond the boundaries of holiness that such a sacrifice is required to abide, and therefore you shouldn't go outside the land of Israel. Now, I just want to remind you that this is a good explanation for why you shouldn't go down to Egypt to avoid the famine. We asked the question about finding a wife. And there, I told you that according to Rashi, you cannot use this reason as a full explanation for why he didn't find a wife for himself, because Rashi says that if you don't find anyone elsewhere of my family who's willing to have a wife from them, marry Isaac, then Abraham says to Eliezer, you should take a wife for Isaac from the daughters of Canaan inside the land of Israel. But you should do it, not he. That doesn't require going outside the land of Israel. That's inside the land of Israel. And still he shouldn't do it. So it comes out that there's an additional requirement that Isaac not look for a wife for himself. I don't know why that is. And according to Tosfos, it wouldn't apply because Tosfos doesn't allow that he should marry someone in one side, one of the Canaanite women. According to Rashi, it's explaining why he didn't get a wife for himself is a separate thing to explain. But at any rate, you do have this idea that he can't leave the land of Israel because of that quality that he acquired when he was at the sacrifice. Now, here's a long blessing that God gives Isaac, and one of the things he says to him is, all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by you, by your offspring. Those words aren't obviously clear. What does it mean to say, they shall bless themselves by your offspring? So Rashi gives a very, I think, dramatic explanation. This is verse 4 on page 282. A person says to his son, may your offspring be like the offspring of Isaac. What do I want for you, my child? That your children should be like the children of Isaac. First of all, as we have mentioned on other occasions, if you want to give someone a blessing, in a way, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful blessing that you can give to someone is that his children be successful. What does a person want more than that his children should be successful? That's really a very, very high priority for any parent. Then the question is this. Father saying to his son, I want you to be successful. What will it mean for you to be successful? That your children should be successful, giving you a blessing that you should be, have a life that you feel was worthwhile and accountable. But now how will he express that your children will be successful? Say, well, your children should be like Isaac's children. So now, it means that, at least when we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, people look at us, and they look at us as sort of the most successful people in the world. We have the most successful lives. After all, this person who's blessing his son, your children should be like the children of Isaac, he's not running to become Jewish. Not converting. So he doesn't want his grandchildren to keep Shabbos, keep kashrus. That's not it. It's that when you look at the Jews, when they're living the way in which they're supposed to be living, their lives are just better lives. Maybe a way to understand this is what we'll see in the Megillah Esther, when Haman is invited to a repast with the king and queen, just the king and queen, and he's prime minister, and he's very rich, and he's powerful. And the king made a law that everyone is to bow down to him. And he goes out to the square to go home, and Mordecai doesn't bow down, and he comes home devastated, tragic, destroyed. Why? My goodness gracious. So Haman says to the assembled company, his friends and family and his wife, I have all these great, powerful successes, and all of this is worth nothing to me when I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting in the gate of the king and doesn't bow down. So you look at that and you think, really? Okay, maybe he was insane. I wouldn't mind concluding that Haman was insane, but it's really very exaggerated. You have everything but one person that kills everything. So I had a student here maybe 20 years ago. I had told them that in the book of Esther, when it says the king, it doesn't say King Achashverosh, just the king. It refers both to flesh and blood Achashverosh and to God. When it says King Achashverosh, it's only referring to the flesh and blood king. Here it doesn't mention his name. So it has a double reference. And this student said to me, Maybe what's bothering Haman is this, that he knows that Mordechai the Jew is sitting in the king's gate, capital K, that he's closer to the creator of the universe than anything that Haman has, power and wealth and glory and authority, and closest to the king. What Mordechai has outclasses all of that. And that's why he can't abide Mordechai sitting there. Not because one person doesn't bow to him, but the very existence of Mordechai doing what he's doing proves to Haman that what he's doing is second class. And I think that's a message that we have communicated to down through history, not consistently. We've made mistakes. Sometimes we didn't express that presence in the best possible way. But it is something. Even Yamach Shemo, the author of The Final Solution, said, you know why I'm going after the Jews? Because they invented the conscience. The idea of right and wrong, which then got expressed in religion, which poisons the human spirit, following Nietzsche. We should be able to transcend those values and use strength, using his social Darwinism, all of which is nonsense. The world belongs to the strong, the ones who can outfight the other ones. Nature red in tooth and claw because of the fight for survival. He identified us as creating conscience as a way of expressing a higher reality and a higher value. And he had to destroy us because that stood in the way of his being able to identify and to champion the power-based philosophy that he wanted to live by. So, this is the idea that they will bless their children through you by using you as a reference. The person said to his child, I hope that your children will be like his children and have that kind of success. Again, not by keeping Shabbos. He's not wishing his child to keep Shabbos and kashrus and daven every day, and become part of the Jewish people. But success, value, pride, nobility. That's what he wishes for his child, and we become the symbol of that. And Rashi says, wherever else you have this phraseology, this is where you learn that's what it means. And if you don't say that, it's quite hard to understand. What would it mean to say that they bless themselves by you, through you, using you as a reference? It's very hard to explain what it means. Okay.
Good.
Big brother.